My mother always said family comes first, but I never thought that meant paying with my own eyes. She summoned me to our cold Chicago estate, expecting me to sign away my corneas to save my blind sister. She thought I was just a blindly devoted daughter. She was wrong. I did not give her my eyes. Instead, in the middle of her lavish gala, I unleashed the brutal truth, burning her entire empire of lies to ashes. Hello and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. We are always so incredibly grateful for your time, and we hope you are doing well today. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep producing the content you love. If you find today's story engaging, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel. There, you will find exclusive true stories that are even more captivating and much longer, featuring highly detailed situations that we simply cannot make public on YouTube, all brought to life by multiple emotional voice actors. You can easily join us by scanning the Patreon QR code currently on your screen or by clicking the link provided in the video description or pinned comment below. Now, let us dive right into today's chilling tale, as told by our main character, Aria Lewis. My phone rang at exactly 2 in the morning. It was my mother, Evelyn. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not care that I had just finished an 80-hour work week. She simply demanded I board the very first flight from New York to our family estate in Chicago. It is a matter of life and death, she said. I was 28 years old, the strategy director at Meridian Nexus Logistics. I spent my days managing multi-million-dollar portfolios and outmaneuvering corporate sharks. Yet, one sharp, demanding tone from Evelyn still possessed the power to make my stomach tighten into painful knots. Against my better judgment, I dropped everything and flew back. I stepped into the grand foyer of our childhood home just as the sun was rising. The air inside felt sterile and overwhelmingly heavy. It was cold. It felt like stepping inside a mausoleum dressed in expensive Italian marble and imported silk. I walked slowly into the formal living room and realized instantly I was walking right into a carefully laid trap. This was not a terrified family gathering in a moment of medical crisis. It was a tribunal. Evelyn sat perfectly rigid in the center velvet armchair, holding court. To her left sat my bitter Aunt Margaret. Margaret's face was pinched in its usual, infuriating state of moral superiority, her hands clutching a silver rosary. To her right sat my half-sister, Chloe. Chloe was only 25 years old. She sat perfectly still, her unblinking eyes staring blankly at a wall she could not see. Macular degeneration had aggressively stolen her vision completely over the past 12 months. Before I could even set my travel bag down on the floor, Evelyn tossed a thick, heavy stack of manila folders onto the glass coffee table. The dull thud echoed aggressively in the silent, suffocating room. "There is an exclusive private clinic in Switzerland," Evelyn stated. Her voice was utterly flat. It was calculated, rehearsed, and utterly devoid of maternal warmth. "They specialize in highly experimental corneal transplants. They can restore Chloe's sight." I looked at Chloe. She did not react. Not a twitch, not a gasp of hope. I looked back at Evelyn, my mind racing to process the information. "That is incredible news. Mother, when does she leave for Geneva?" "As soon as you agree," Evelyn said. She leaned forward, the expensive fabric of her dress rustling. Her eyes locked onto mine like a starving predator cornering its prey. "You are the only compatible donor, Aria, the only one in the entire global registry." The sprawling living room suddenly shrank. The oxygen grew devastatingly thin. My own mother was casually, coldly asking me to surrender a piece of my physical body. "Your cornea, Aria," Aunt Margaret chimed in, leaning forward as well. Her voice dripped with a toxic, poisonous sweetness. "It is such a small sacrifice for family. What good is all your fancy corporate success at that logistics company if your own flesh and blood is forced to live in the dark? You have 2 perfectly good eyes. Chloe has absolutely none. Do the Christian thing. Give your sister her life back." My heart hammered violently against my ribs. I forced myself to breathe evenly. I tried desperately to maintain my professional composure. The corporate strategist inside me forcefully took over my panic. A corneal transplant from a living donor, that is highly unusual and ethically questionable in most modern countries. What are the surgical risks for me? Will I lose vision in that eye entirely? What is the recovery protocol? Evelyn waved her flawlessly manicured hand in the air, batting away my legitimate terror as if I had merely asked a foolish question about the weather. The risks are completely minimal. Do not be so dramatic. Arya, you sit safely behind a mahogany desk all day looking at spreadsheets. You only need one working eye for desk work. Chloe needs light to actually live. She needs a future. You are going to give it to her today. A cold, damp sweat broke out on the back of my neck. The sheer, terrifying audacity of her logic was paralyzing. But then, Evelyn pushed the massive stack of folders closer to my edge of the glass table. The surgery is already scheduled, Evelyn said, her tone quickening, losing its composed edge. But the Swiss clinic requires absolute legal clearance by tonight. I need you to sign these medical authorization forms right now. We must overnight them to Europe immediately. I stepped closer and looked down at the papers. It was not a single, standard medical consent form. It was a dense, heavy brick of complex legal documents. It had to be at least 200 pages thick. The font was microscopic. The clauses were endless, filled with dense financial jargon that had absolutely nothing to do with medical procedures. A massive warning bell rang inside my head, a deafening, screaming siren of pure instinct. I am not signing anything tonight, I said. My voice trembled for a fraction of a second, then steadied into cold steel. This is a major, life-altering surgical procedure. I need to read this thoroughly. I need my corporate lawyer to look at every single one of these documents. The velvet mask instantly slipped. Evelyn's beautiful face contorted into something genuinely demonic. She stood up violently, knocking her delicate porcelain teacup over. It shattered into dozens of jagged pieces against the hardwood floor. "You selfish, disgusting, ungrateful wretch!" Evelyn shrieked. The polished Chicago society matron vanished entirely, replaced by a desperate, cornered, vicious animal. "I gave you life. You owe everything to this family. If you dare walk out that door without signing these papers, you are completely dead to me. I will ruin you. I will personally call every single board member at Meridian Nexus Logistics. I will tell all of Chicago high society exactly what kind of heartless monster you truly are. You will be a total pariah in this city." Margaret nodded vigorously, whispering frantic prayers under her breath as if I were a demon that needed to be exorcised. I looked at my mother's purple, raging face. I looked at the towering, suspicious stack of legal documents meant to seal my fate. Finally, I looked at Chloe. My younger sister remained completely motionless amidst the screaming. She did not beg for my eyes. She did not cry for her future. She just sat in an eerie, unnatural, chilling silence, looking exactly like a hollow prop in a dark, twisted play she did not even understand. I did not say a single word in response. I turned on my heel and walked straight out the heavy oak front doors. As I stepped into the freezing, biting Chicago night, the sound of my mother's loud, theatrical, staged sobbing echoed loudly behind me. The velvet trap had snapped shut, but I had viciously torn my leg off to escape it. I was bleeding, but for the first time in 28 years, I was completely awake. By the time I unlocked the door to my downtown apartment, my phone was vibrating violently against my palm. The barrage had already begun. There were 47 missed calls and over 100 text messages. They poured in from every aunt, uncle, and distant cousin who had never bothered to remember my birthday but suddenly felt entitled to my body parts. Aunt Margaret left a venomous, 5-minute voicemail detailing how I would rot in hell. A cousin I had not seen in 10 years texted to call me a greedy, selfish monster. For exactly 1 hour. I sat on my cold hardwood floor in the dark. The sheer weight of the orchestrated guilt choked my breath. Was I crazy? Was I truly a monster for wanting to keep my own vision? But then, the initial shock burned away. The sorrow evaporated. In its place, the cold, calculating instinct of a corporate strategist clawed its way to the surface. Things did not add up. The frantic urgency, the massive legal document, Evelyn's sheer desperation to get my signature right that very second. I did not need a therapist. I needed a forensic accountant. At 6 in the morning, I made a secure phone call. I reached out to Julian. He was a brilliant, notoriously ruthless private investigator and financial auditor I had once hired to vet a shady supply chain vendor for Meridian Nexus Logistics. Julian did not deal in emotions. He dealt in absolute, indisputable data. I gave him the name of the supposed Swiss clinic and the name of the lead surgeon Evelyn had briefly mentioned. I told him I needed everything he could find, and I needed it yesterday. While Julian hunted the money, I hunted the medical truth. I booted up my encrypted laptop and bypassed the primitive security on our old family server. Growing up, I was the one who set up Evelyn's home network. She never changed her passwords. It took me less than 15 minutes to gain full access to her private email archives. I searched Chloe's name. I bypassed the recent, carefully curated emails and dug into the deleted folders from 8 months ago. I found a hidden, locked medical file from a leading ophthalmologist at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I opened it. I read the real, unedited diagnosis. My blood ran completely ice cold. Chloe's condition was brutally real, but the cause was irreversible optic nerve death, not surface tissue damage. The report explicitly stated that a corneal transplant would be absolutely 100% useless. It would not bring back a single sliver of light. The Swiss miracle cure was a complete, fabricated lie. The surgery was a work of pure fiction. My phone rang. It was Julian. He had the results of his preliminary investigation. "Aria," Julian said, his voice stripped of any pleasantries. "Your Swiss clinic does not exist. It is a ghost. The address listed on their official website belongs to an abandoned warehouse in Geneva. The corporation itself is a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands just 3 weeks ago." "And the doctor?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "Dr. Aris Thorne," Julian replied. "He was permanently stripped of his global medical license 5 years ago. He ran a fraudulent stem cell clinic in Eastern Europe, scamming terminally ill patients out of their life savings. He is currently under investigation by international authorities for medical fraud." I closed my eyes. The puzzle pieces were violently slamming together, forming a horrifying picture. "Keep digging, Julian. Follow Evelyn's money. Look for debts. Look for everything she is trying to hide." Exactly 24 hours later, Julian delivered the fatal blow. We met in the back corner of a dimly lit, empty diner on the edge of the city. He slid a thick black folder across the sticky table. It was the financial autopsy of my mother. Evelyn was drowning in an ocean of toxic debt. Over the past 3 years, she had developed a severe underground gambling addiction, high-stakes baccarat, illegal poker rings, and catastrophic offshore sports betting. She had secretly taken out a second and third mortgage on the family estate. The bank was preparing to foreclose in less than 60 days. But that was not the worst part. She owes $8 million to people who do not use collection agencies, Julian stated flatly, pointing to a series of terrifying wire transfers. She borrowed heavily from a violent underground syndicate. They want their money by the end of the month, or they take it out of her skin. I stared at the heavily redacted bank statements. The final, disgusting truth washed over me. "The medical authorization forms," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a speeding freight train. "The papers she wanted me to sign last night." I managed to pull a drafted copy from her attorney's compromised cloud drive, Julian said. He handed me a single sheet of paper. I read the fine print. It had absolutely nothing to do with medical consent or surgical liability. It was a blind proxy agreement and an irrevocable financial guarantor contract. If I had signed that massive stack of papers in my emotional panic, I would have legally pledged my entire portfolio of vested stock options at Meridian Nexus Logistics as collateral. I would have authorized an immediate $8 million international loan under the completely fake guise of overseas medical expenses. Evelyn did not want my eyes. She wanted my fortune. And Chloe, my helpless, terrified, 25-year-old sister was nothing but a pawn. Evelyn was using her own daughter's tragic blindness as emotional bait to manipulate me into signing away my life savings to pay off a massive gambling debt to the criminal underworld. She was willing to let Chloe undergo a traumatic, utterly useless, fake surgery just to sell the illusion. A normal person would have panicked. A normal daughter would have driven back to that mansion, screamed, and thrown these documents in her mother's face. But I was not normal anymore. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that it entirely burned away my capacity for grief. All that remained was a chilling, hyper-focused clarity. I looked at Julian and slid the black folder back toward him. I did not shed a single tear. "We are not going to the police yet," I said, my voice steady and dark. "If I confront her now, she will play the victim. She will hide the money trail. I want to destroy her completely, to kill a toxic parasite. You have to invite it into your bloodstream." I was going to play my mother's twisted game, but I was going to rewrite every single rule. I waited exactly 48 hours before making my move. It was essential to let Evelyn sweat, to let the panic of her impending debt deadline marinate her brain. When I finally picked up my phone to call her, I pinched the bridge of my nose, forced my breathing to become ragged, and let out a broken, trembling sob. "Mother," I whispered into the receiver, my voice a perfect, pitiful replica of a broken daughter. "You are right. I cannot let her live in darkness. I will do it. I will sign the papers. I will give Chloe my corneas." There was a split second of silence on the other end of the line, followed by a sharp intake of breath. The sheer, sickening triumph radiating from Evelyn was palpable. She did not ask how I felt. She did not express a single ounce of maternal relief for my supposed sacrifice. Instead, her voice dripped with the slick, oily satisfaction of a gambler who had just hit the jackpot. "Oh, my sweet, brave girl," Evelyn crooned, her tone so artificially sweet it made my stomach churn. "I knew you would finally see reason. We are going to do this right, Arya. I am organizing a massive charity gala this weekend at the Drake Hotel, a grand event to honor your ultimate sacrifice and to raise additional capital for Chloe's post-operative care fund. All of Chicago high society will be there to witness what a perfect family we are." A gala, of course. Why settle for secretly robbing your eldest daughter when you can use the crime to elevate your social status and milk the city elite for tax-deductible donations? Before the grand signing of my financial death warrant, I needed to know exactly where my sister stood. I visited the estate unannounced the following afternoon. I found Chloe sitting alone in the conservatory, her fingers tracing the textured leaves of a fern. I sat beside her and gently took her hand. I carefully probed her knowledge of the clinic, the surgery, and our mother's finances. "I am so scared, Arya," Chloe whispered, turning her sightless eyes toward my voice. "But Mother says this Swiss doctor is a miracle worker. She says I will be able to see the ocean again by next summer. She promised me." I stared at her pale, hopeful face. She had absolutely no idea. She did not know about the $8 million mafia debt. She did not know the doctor was a disgraced fraud. Evelyn had weaponized Chloe's deepest, most desperate desires, feeding her a beautiful, intoxicating illusion just to bait the trap for me. My sister was not a co-conspirator. She was just another victim waiting to be slaughtered on the altar of our mother's greed. I squeezed her hand, swallowing the bitter taste of rage. I promised myself right then that Evelyn would pay for every single ounce of false hope she had pumped into this girl. I left the estate and drove straight to Julian's underground office. We had work to do. If Evelyn wanted a legally binding proxy agreement that handed over my entire portfolio at Meridian Nexus Logistics, I was going to give her a masterpiece. Julian and I spent 24 unbroken hours meticulously drafting a counterfeit set of financial documents. We used the exact same heavy watermarked legal paper her crooked lawyers used. We replicated the dense, mind-numbing corporate jargon, but buried deep within the 80 pages of the guarantor contract, Julian embedded highly complex poison pills. The account numbers were slightly transposed, the routing protocols directed to frozen dummy accounts. It was a labyrinth of financial dead ends so sophisticated that Evelyn's desperate, panicked legal team would never spot the traps until they actually tried to cash out the stock. By then, it would be far too late. I met Evelyn the next morning in the private dining room of her country club. She pushed the thick folder across the mahogany table, her eyes glittering with rabid, barely concealed greed. "Sign right here, darling," Evelyn urged, tapping a diamond manicured finger on the dotted line. I picked up the solid gold pen, but hovered it an inch above the paper. "I will sign this, Mother, but I have one single condition." Evelyn's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Anything for my hero." "I want to be the keynote speaker at the gala," I said, looking her dead in the eyes. "I want the final 20 minutes of the evening. I have put together a very special video presentation about my childhood with Chloe, about sisterhood, and about the true meaning of family. I want to play it for the entire ballroom right before we officially announce the surgery date." Evelyn relaxed, a smug, patronizing smile spreading across her lips. She thought I wanted a moment of pathetic, tearful glory. She thought I wanted the elite of Chicago to clap for my martyrdom. "Of course, Arya, the stage is entirely yours." I pressed the pen down and signed my name. Evelyn snatched the documents back so fast she nearly tore the heavy paper. She practically floated out of the country club, utterly convinced she had just secured $8 million to save her own life. She had no idea she had just signed her own death warrant. As soon as Evelyn was gone, I walked to the nearest post office. I carried a thick, heavily secured package. Inside were copies of the real financial records, the underground syndicate loan agreements, the offshore shell company registrations, and the irrefutable proof of the medical fraud. I mailed one copy to the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I mailed the second copy to the Criminal Investigation Unit of the Internal Revenue Service. The snare was officially set. The poison was in the water. All that was left was the final performance. I went to my favorite boutique downtown and ordered a custom-tailored, floor-length silk dress. It was not a soft, demure color of sacrifice. It was a brilliant, striking, blood red, the color of a woman stepping onto a battlefield. The Lewis family was about to host the event of the century, and I was going to make sure no one ever forgot it. The grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was completely transformed into a suffocating cathedral of manufactured empathy. 2,000 white orchids dripped from the vaulted ceiling, their heavy, sweet scent mingling with the metallic odor of camera flashes and the overwhelming stench of expensive, musky perfumes. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided across the polished marble floors, balancing heavy silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of vintage champagne. Over 500 guests had gathered. There were prominent state senators, hedge fund billionaires, and local media anchors, all buzzing with a sickening, ravenous appetite for our family tragedy. They were not there to secretly support a medical miracle. They were there to consume a real-life fairy tale and wash their own conscience clean with a massive tax-deductible check. Evelyn held court on the crimson-red carpet at the grand entrance. She wore a custom, silver-beaded gown that easily cost over $40,000. She was the absolute picture of a beautifully tragic, long-suffering matriarch. As the local news cameras rolled, she dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a delicate lace handkerchief. She spoke in a breathless, trembling voice about my unbelievable bravery, weaving a sickeningly sweet narrative of a mother's answered prayers. She paused exactly when the camera flashes peaked, ensuring every single angle captured her manufactured, highly profitable grief. Next to Evelyn sat Chloe. My mother had forced my 25-year-old sister into a heavily padded velvet wheelchair for the evening. Chloe's legs worked perfectly fine, but Evelyn knew that a beautiful, blind, and seemingly crippled girl was the ultimate, undeniable prop. Chloe looked incredibly frail, utterly lost in the chaos of hundreds of overlapping voices and blinding strobe lights she could feel burning against her skin but could not see. Her trembling hands clutched a silk shawl. She was completely trapped. Paraded around like a wounded exotic bird to stimulate the pity of wealthy socialites who eagerly scribbled out checks with 4, 5, and 6 zeros. I stood near the massive ice sculpture in the center of the room, draped in my floor-length, blood-red silk gown. The hypocrisy surrounding me was a physical, nauseating weight pushing down on my chest. Relatives who had brutally cursed my name just 3 days ago now swarmed around me like flies on rotting meat. Aunt Margaret, the same woman who had left me that venomous, 5-minute voicemail condemning me to hell, now reached out and firmly grasped my hands. She wore a giant, fake smile that stretched so wide it did not reach her cold, calculating eyes. She loudly praised my Christian soul to a nearby group of real estate investors, claiming she always knew I had a heart of pure gold. My cousin, the one who called me a greedy monster in a text message, kissed my cheek and told me how deeply proud he was to be in my bloodline. I did not pull away. I did not scream in their faces. I merely offered them a flawless, dead mechanical smile, letting them dig their own graves deeper with every single sugary compliment. Across the sprawling ballroom, concealed by the heavy velvet drapes near the secondary exit, I caught a brief, fleeting glimpse of Julian. He wore a sharp, tailored black tuxedo, blending seamlessly into the sea of the corporate elite. With the effortless grace of a ghost, he slipped past the 2 hired security guards and entered the elevated audiovisual control booth overlooking the main stage. I watched carefully as he smoothly distracted the lead technician with a fabricated question about the audio feed, while his left hand swiftly plugged a small, encrypted black flash drive directly into the master projection system. Julian looked down through the tinted glass window and gave me a single, barely perceptible nod. The explosive charge was planted. A sharp, ringing sound echoed through the massive room as Evelyn elegantly tapped a silver spoon against her crystal champagne flute. A heavy, expectant silence immediately fell over the 500 guests. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. Evelyn gracefully glided up the carpeted stairs to the elevated main stage. The ambient lights dimmed, and a single, brilliant white spotlight illuminated her silver gown. "Ladies and gentlemen," Evelyn began, her voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system, thick with rehearsed, trembling emotion. "I stand before you tonight, not just as a member of this wonderful community, but as a deeply humbled mother. For the past 12 months, a dark, terrifying shadow has fallen over our family as my sweet Chloe lost her precious sight. But God has finally answered our prayers." She paused, letting a soft, dramatic gasp escape her lips, gripping the edges of the podium as if overcome by emotion. "He gave me Arya, my eldest daughter, who is making the ultimate, selfless sacrifice to pull her sister out of the dark. Tonight, we celebrate the true, unbreakable bond of family." The crowd erupted into thunderous, sustained applause. Evelyn wiped away another invisible tear, her eyes locking onto mine from across the sprawling room. Her smile was sharp, hungry, and entirely victorious. She truly believed she had won. "Please, Arya," Evelyn beckoned, extending her manicured hand toward me. "Come up here, come stand in the light where you belong, and let us officially announce the date you will give your sister her future back." The applause swelled into a deafening roar as I stepped forward. Every single eye in that massive ballroom was fixed firmly on me. The cameras pivoted. The flashes exploded like miniature lightning strikes in the dim room. I walked slowly, my red dress trailing over the pristine white carpet like a river of blood. I did not rush. I let the heavy, suffocating anticipation build as I climbed the 4 small stairs. I walked past the massive floral arrangements and stopped directly in front of the polished glass podium. Evelyn stepped back, gesturing to me with a look of overwhelming, sickening pride. I reached out and firmly gripped the cool edges of the microphone stand. I looked down at the sea of wealthy, expectant faces, all waiting for a beautiful, tear-jerking monologue about sisterly love and selfless sacrifice. Then, I turned my head very slowly. I locked my eyes directly onto Evelyn's smug, self-satisfied face. I leaned closely into the microphone. The state-of-the-art sound system picked up the quiet, sharp intake of my breath, amplifying it across the silent hall. "Mother," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, echoing like a gunshot through the absolute, dead silence of the room. "Is the black market price of my eye enough to pay off your $8 million debt to the criminal underground?" The absolute silence that slammed down upon the massive grand ballroom was so profound, so heavy. It felt as though all 500 guests had simultaneously stopped breathing. The string quartet had long since lowered their instruments. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes ceased entirely. For one long, agonizing second, the only sound in the cavernous, vaulted room was the high-pitched hum of the state-of-the-art sound system amplifying my cold, calculated question. Evelyn stood frozen just 3 feet away from me. The radiant, triumphant glow of the manufactured, grieving mother drained from her face in an instant, replaced by a sickening, chalky white pallor. Her flawless socialite mask shattered right before my eyes. Panic, raw and undisguised, flared in her widened pupils. She lunged forward, her diamond-covered hands desperately grasping for the metal stem of the microphone stand, completely forgetting the hundreds of cameras pointed directly at her. "Turn that off," Evelyn hissed, her voice a frantic, ugly rasp that bled through the speakers. "Someone cut her microphone right now." I did not step back. I did not flinch. With a swift, forceful motion, I slammed the side of my hand against her wrist, knocking her desperate grasp away from the stand. Without breaking eye contact with my mother, I raised my right hand slightly in the air. High above the ballroom floor, inside the dark audiovisual control booth, Julian executed the final command. The massive, floor-to-ceiling digital projection screen behind the main stage suddenly blazed to life with a blinding white light. The audience physically recoiled, shielding their eyes for a fraction of a second. They were expecting a heartwarming, tear-jerking memorial video about 2 loving sisters. Instead, towering 20 feet high, a heavily redacted but unmistakably official bank statement appeared. "Take a good look, ladies and gentlemen," I commanded, my voice booming over the speakers, steady and sharp as a finely honed blade. "Look at the woman you are writing your massive charity checks to tonight. Mother, you told this entire room that you were raising funds for an exclusive medical procedure in Geneva. You told them I was the selfless hero." I gestured behind me as the slide on the massive screen shifted. It now displayed the official corporate registry of the supposed Swiss clinic. The words "Fraudulent Shell Company" flashed in bold red letters across the screen, courtesy of Julian's brilliant graphic design. Beside it was the mugshot of Dr. Aris Thorne, accompanied by his extensive international criminal record. "There is no miracle clinic in Switzerland," I announced to the paralyzed crowd. "The address listed on your beautiful embossed charity brochures belongs to an abandoned, rat-infested warehouse. The esteemed doctor you hired has been permanently barred from practicing medicine globally for the last 5 years due to severe medical fraud. The entire surgery is a meticulously crafted lie." A collective, sharp gasp rippled through the sea of wealthy socialites and powerful politicians. The shock rapidly mutated into outrage. The news cameras, which had been perfectly positioned to capture a heartwarming embrace, instantly pivoted. A terrifying barrage of bright white flashes exploded like machine gun fire, zeroing in on Evelyn's horrified face. "Arya, stop this madness, right now," Evelyn stammered, her voice shaking violently as she backed away toward the edge of the stage. She raised her hands as if to physically block the blinding camera flashes. "You are confused. You are ruining our family name. Security, remove my daughter from this stage." Not a single security guard moved. They were too captivated, or perhaps too terrified, by the explosive truth unfolding above them. "I am not confused," I fired back, my voice turning into a lethal weapon. "The only thing ruining this family is your $8 million underground gambling debt. Mother, Julian advanced the slides. The screen illuminated the dark, terrifying reality of Evelyn's financial ruin. High-interest loan agreements from notorious offshore crime syndicates, 3 separate, maxed-out mortgages on the family estate. The red ink of her catastrophic failures painted a damning picture across the massive display. "You did not bring me to Chicago to harvest my corneas," I continued, making sure my enunciation was flawless, ensuring every single reporter in the room caught every single word. "You brought me here to exploit my panic. You tried to weaponize my love for my sister, shoving a massive stack of medical authorization papers in my face and demanding I sign them immediately to save her life. But those were not medical forms, were they? They were irrevocable proxy agreements. You set up a blind trust to completely liquidate my vested corporate stock at Meridian Nexus Logistics. You were going to steal my entire life savings to pay off the violent mobsters threatening to break your legs." The ballroom erupted into complete chaos. The polite, civilized veneer of Chicago high society dissolved into a frenzy of shouted questions and horrified gasps. Hedge fund managers who had just written 6-figure donation checks began screaming at the event organizers. The reporters pushed past the velvet ropes, thrusting their heavy recording equipment toward the stage. Evelyn was hyperventilating now, the heavy silver fabric of her $40,000 gown heaving with her panicked breaths. "Lies!" she shrieked, her voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched wail. "These are fabricated lies from an ungrateful, mentally unstable child." "If these are lies," I said, leaning closer to the microphone, "then explain the final document. Mother." I looked down from the elevated stage directly into the front row. My eyes found Chloe. My 25-year-old sister was still sitting in the velvet-padded wheelchair our mother had forced her into. Chloe's hands were trembling violently, her knuckles completely white as she gripped the silk shawl. She could not see the massive screen, but she could hear everything. She could hear the destruction of the woman who had promised her the son. "Julian, play the final file," I ordered. The digital screen shifted one last time. It displayed a highly confidential, authentic medical diagnosis from Northwestern Memorial Hospital, signed and dated 8 months ago by a leading, board-certified ophthalmologist. "Chloe," I said softly, but the microphone carried my voice perfectly to her. "I am so incredibly sorry. I truly am." I looked back at the crowd, my voice hardening into absolute, unyielding steel. My mother knew the surgery was fake because she knew Chloe's condition was permanently irreversible. The medical report on the screen clearly states that my sister suffered total optic nerve death. A corneal transplant is absolutely useless. It would never restore a single fraction of her sight. Evelyn knew her youngest daughter would never see the light of day again, yet she deliberately, sadistically promised her a cure. She fed her own blind child a beautiful, intoxicating lie, solely to create a convincing prop to rob me blind. The cruelty of that revelation hit the grand ballroom like a physical shockwave. It was one thing to steal money. It was an entirely different universe of evil to mentally torture a disabled child for financial gain. A soul-shattering, guttural wail echoed from the front row. It was Chloe. She threw the heavy silk shawl off her shoulders and tried to stand, her legs giving out beneath her as the crushing weight of our mother's betrayal broke her completely. She collapsed onto the polished marble floor, sobbing uncontrollably. She was not crying because she would never see again. She was mourning the realization that she was nothing but a worthless, disposable pawn to the woman who gave her life. "How could you?" Chloe screamed, her voice tearing through the chaotic noise of the room, directed blindly toward the stage. "You promised me! You promised me!" Evelyn took another step back, nearly tripping over the heavy cables of the stage lights. She looked like a trapped rat, darting her eyes toward the secondary exits. Down on the floor, Aunt Margaret suddenly snapped out of her paralyzed shock. Her face turned a furious, violent shade of crimson. She hoisted up the skirt of her expensive dress and began marching toward the stage stairs, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at me. "You demonic, vindictive little—" Margaret started to scream, ready to physically drag me away from the podium. She never finished her sentence. The massive, heavy brass doors at the rear of the grand ballroom suddenly blew open with a deafening crash. The sheer force of the entrance silenced the screaming crowd. Over 24 men and women in dark, tactical windbreakers swarmed into the elegant cathedral of orchids and champagne. The bright, unmistakable gold lettering of the Federal Bureau of Investigation flashed on their backs, perfectly contrasting with the badges of the Internal Revenue Service criminal investigators who flanked them. "Federal agents," a commanding, authoritative voice roared over the chaos, completely overpowering the panicked murmurs of the elite guests. "Nobody move toward the exits. This entire event is currently locked down." The sea of wealthy socialites parted instantly, scrambling backward in absolute terror as a team of 6 heavily armed agents marched straight down the center aisle. Boots stomping heavily on the pristine white carpet, they bypassed the screaming relatives, bypassed the sobbing Chloe, and marched directly up the 4 small stairs onto the main stage. Evelyn let out a terrifying, animalistic shriek as 2 federal agents violently grabbed her arms, pinning them behind her back. "Evelyn Lewis," the lead agent declared, producing a thick stack of official warrants. "You are under arrest for severe financial fraud, interstate wire fraud, massive tax evasion, and attempted grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you start using it immediately." The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around Evelyn's wrists echoed loudly through the microphone I still held. It was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard in my entire life. The news cameras descended like a pack of starving wolves. Hundreds of bright white flashes illuminated Evelyn as she was forcefully dragged off the elevated stage. Her flawless silver gown tangled around her legs. Her expensive, meticulously styled hair fell into a wild, disheveled mess across her tear-streaked, completely broken face. "You traitor!" Evelyn screamed at the top of her lungs, twisting her neck to glare at me with eyes full of pure, unadulterated venom as the agents hauled her down the carpeted aisle. "I am your mother. You are nothing without me. You will burn in hell for this. Arya!" I stood perfectly still behind the glass podium. I looked down at the woman who had tried to harvest my body and my future to cover her own rotting sins. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just watched her empire of lies crumble into fine, gray dust under the blinding lights of the media. The grand, inescapable disgrace was permanently etched into the history of Chicago high society. Captured on 100 different recording devices, Evelyn was destroyed, thoroughly and completely. The Pandora's box was wide open, and the monster was finally locked away. It took exactly 6 months for the dust to completely settle. The heavy iron gates of the sprawling Chicago estate were permanently padlocked by the bank. Evelyn was officially convicted on multiple federal charges and sentenced to 15 years in a high-security prison. The high society elite, who had eagerly drunk her champagne and wept at her manufactured tragedy, instantly turned their backs on her, erasing her name from their social registries as if she had never existed. The hypocritical relatives who had cursed my name and demanded my flesh suddenly changed their tune. Aunt Margaret and the cousins left dozens of groveling voicemails, praising my bravery, apologizing profusely, and, predictably, asking for financial favors now that the family matriarch was locked away. I did not listen to a single one. I walked directly into my cellular provider's store, changed my phone number, and severed every single rotting branch of that toxic family tree forever. Chloe was the only casualty I truly mourned. I did not visit her, but I did not abandon her either. Using my own funds, I anonymously arranged and paid for her to live at a state-of-the-art, highly specialized rehabilitation center for the blind in upstate New York. It cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it was worth every single penny to ensure she was safe. I kept my distance, knowing that we both needed a massive amount of time to heal from the severe psychological scars our mother had inflicted. Perhaps one day, years from now, we will be able to speak again, but not today. At Meridian Nexus Logistics, my actions did not go unnoticed. The board of directors did not see a scandalous public liability. Instead, they saw a corporate strategist who was utterly fearless, someone who could surgically dismantle an $8 million fraud operation without blinking an eye. Within 2 months, I was officially promoted to the position of vice president. I met Julian on a quiet Tuesday afternoon at a small, independent coffee shop near the harbor. For the first time since we met, there were no black folders, no background checks, and no crisis management plans on the table. He wore a simple gray sweater, and his smile was actually genuine. As we sat there talking about absolutely nothing related to corporate sabotage or federal indictments, a quiet, gentle spark of romance ignited between two people who fundamentally valued the absolute truth above all else. I am now 29 years old. I stood in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my corner office on the 50th floor. I looked down at the sprawling, bustling city below. For the first time in my entire life, I felt a profound, untouchable peace. I no longer had to constantly prove my worth through forced sacrifices or bear the crushing weight of a toxic bloodline. My eyes, the very eyes my mother tried to violently rip away from me to pay for her rotting sins, were perfectly intact. They saw the world with absolute, blinding clarity, focused entirely on a bright, unwritten future that belonged to no one but me. Family are not the ones who demand your light to cover their darkness. My light, I will keep for myself. Thank you so incredibly much for taking the time to listen to my story today. We would love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Please let us know in the comments section below. If you found today's story engaging and empowering, please consider helping us keep this channel alive by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon. As we mentioned at the beginning, YouTube has entirely removed our funding, and your generous support is the only thing keeping these stories going. On our Patreon, you will gain immediate access to our most intense, exclusive true stories that we simply cannot share on this public platform. You can easily join by scanning the QR code currently displayed on your screen, or by clicking the direct link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. We cannot wait to welcome you to the community. Until next time, stay safe, trust your instincts, and always protect your own light.